He is the host of the Grift Report. He's the author of the Patriot Report. He's on X at Hotep Jesus. He's been a guest on Gutfeld and many other programs like Joe Rogan. He is Hotep Jesus, and he's now on the Will Kane Show. What's up? What's up?
What's up, Will? Thanks for having me, bro. How's everything?
It's good, but as we go through this conversation, should I say, what's up, Hotep? Should I say, what's up, Brian? Should I say, what's up, Jesus? Which will be awkward. But which would
Hotep.
how would you prefer
Hotep.
me to
Everybody
refer to
Hotep.
you?
Call me Hotep.
What is Hotep?
Hotep. What is Hotep? Hotep is ancient Medunetta. This is ancient language stemming from ancient Kemet, or some might call it ancient Egypt. And it's a word that means peace or satisfaction. But right around the time that Barack Obama was in office and Black Lives Matter started to explode, there became this takeover, this liberal communist takeover of black intelligentsia, black corporate media, Huffington Post coming in and buying out publications like The Root and sort of derailing where black people were mentally. And at that point, Hotep became a pejorative. And so, I was used to the word being seen in great light. And so I wasn't going to have that happen on my watch. So we took the word back and started a movement out of it. So now we're Hotep Nation, hotepnation.com, and we support the homeschooling community.
So I think this is what I assume you're going to take issue with. This is from Urban Dictionary. Hotep, Afrocentric brother, usually insecure, who claims to be woke but actually isn't unless you are straight black men. In a Hotep's eyes, you're responsible for the destruction of the black community. Misogynistic, homophobic, transphobic, conspiracy theory aficionado. He will fill your head up with so much pseudoscience and ill-researched historical facts, you'll be ready to bash his head in with a Google search engine. That's Urban Dictionary on Hotep.
That's perfect. That's a perfect definition. I love that definition. The reason why I love that definition is you have to think about the author of that definition, right? And a few things that they pointed out there were, one of them was sexual orientation. The other one was science, right? So we just had a situation where a lot of people went out and got the experimental inoculation. Hoteps have told people for many, many years, if not decades, not to take that inoculation. We stayed away from it. So, they fall in line with Gil Bates and the rest of them, right? George Soros, etc. The other thing is their sexual orientation. Well, what is up with that? There was a time where, in the black community, if you wanted to be pro-black, the only requisite was being black, right? Now it's like, oh, you got to affirm trans people. You have to affirm gay people. So it sort of shows you how the Marxism has came in and started to dominate black intelligentsia, black corporate media. So that definition doesn't bother me. It's perfect because now I get to show people, look, this is what these people are about. They're about something that has nothing to do with black people.
So besides, of course, yourself, who would you give us is a great, maybe historical example of what you would say is a leader of the Hotep movement? I mean, I wouldn't profess any level of expertise, but I've, read a little bit about the movement, and it certainly does seem to have an anti-communist bent. It certainly has a self-reliance bent, a self-sustaining to the community bent, a lot of which rings of maybe even Frederick Douglass or Booker T. Washington. But I don't know that you would claim those particular leaders as the best emblem of the movement. Who would be a great symbol?
Probably Garvey. Marcus Garvey, UNIA.
Marcus Garvey.
Yeah, I mean, Marcus Garvey went to war with the NAACP. A lot of people don't know this, but NAACP, along with W.E.B. Du Bois, these sellout Negroes, basically what they were doing was they wanted to have, they actually got them extradited. They were snitching because they wanted to do things a particular way. In one of his writings, he mentions how he goes into the NAACP office and everyone in there is white passing, right? So the NAACP was this white passing organization run by white passing and white people. and really used to control the black mind. It's controlled opposition. It's making sure that black people never practice anything that could render them independent. Instead, it seeks dependence on government, dependence upon whatever committees they put together, concepts, ideas, but it really doesn't fight for independence and teach independence. An example of that would be integration. People down south didn't want integration. What they wanted was representation of their tax dollars, which they were not getting. NAACP came down there and said, we'll fight for this, but we also want integration. They said, no, we don't want integration. And then you see how terrible integration turned out to be. You look now, and the black family's falling apart. Black wealth is falling apart. There's no black banks. So the black family was much better off during the pre-civil rights era, pre-integration, from a very economic standpoint, and even culturally as well.
Well, I've seen you talk about this. Okay, first of all, on one level, there's the cancer of victimhood. That's a cancer for both the individual and for a community. If you teach a community or an individual victimhood, and I've seen you say this, you also teach them dependency. You can never arrive at self-sufficiency or even a sense of self-worth if it's always predicated upon someone else providing you that self-sufficiency or that self-worth. But you also said that this movement kind of, in your estimation, started kind of around Barack Obama, where the black intelligentsia became more open to Marxism. And again, I don't hold myself out as an expert, but a little bit of historical understanding. Even dating back to the 50s and the 60s, a lot of that black nationalist movement was behind the scenes organized and funded by the Marxist movements that were spreading the tentacles of the Soviet Union across the globe. Like, they were looking to create this idea that black identity is intertwined with Marxism. This seems like something that, while it maybe have become more obvious in the last decade, has been a half a century in the making. Yeah.
So you have to delineate between Marxism or economic Marxism, and cultural Marxism. What we're dealing with today is more cultural Marxism, where they're trying to disintegrate the culture of the black community and feed it nothing but lecherine. Now, during the time of, for example, the Black Panther Party, you're dealing with basically a bunch of kids. I call them a bunch of kids. These guys were like 20 years old, right? So you can't really expect too much, intelligence from somebody so young. So, and also at that time, it wasn't that many alternatives, right? It was basically United States of America, and it was communism, right? And it seemed like communism had great appeal, and in many ways, communism does. But what I think it comes back to is communists like to latch on to whoever the marginalized group is, whoever the victim class is. They like to latch on to them. The issue is, and this is where Marx is right, is the bourgeoisie, the middle class, tend to have a hands-off approach to the lower class. And when they act like that, when they act like they're too good, they're going to receive animus from the lower class, right? Now, what happens is, because nobody's speaking to these people, somebody is going to have their ear. At that time, the only people that gave them an ear was communists. They're the only people that said, hey, we know you're struggling. Let's talk to you. Had there been opposition to Marxism, then maybe there wouldn't have been Marxism. But at this period, we're talking about, massive racism. For example, the Munn Act, when the Black Panther Party is out in California and they pass anti-gun legislation. This is the Republican Party. This is Reagan, right? So there were many things going on that, sort of, hurt the black community, but only one was speaking to that, and that was Marxism. Today, we have the internet. We have Milton Friedman, we have Soul, we have Walter Williams, we have Rothbard. So there's no excuse to be subject to Marxism, although I think Marx got a lot right. I think what happens with communism is they diagnose the disease, but their prescription is wrong, right? And their diagnosis, I wouldn't say is 100% certain, but it's pretty on point. And that's where we are today, where you have the option to go learn about economics and learn about, how is money created in America and how is our financial system run. And when you start to understand these things, you see how Marxism can't serve you, and capitalism is probably the only means to create any sort of fair competition. And Marxism is going to hinder that because it's going to lend more credence to the government.
Right. And I do want to get into some of the politics of today, but I'm too fascinated by this particular part of the conversation. So, like, in your estimation, and I have a response I'm thinking through as you're talking, but in your estimation, what did he get right, Marx?
The middle class. The middle class attitude is absolutely atrocious. They look down on the downtrodden. They scoff at them. They actually don't do much to help them. And then what happens is, today in capitalism, in the communist practices and policies, the middle class is actually squeezed so much so that they can't help the lower class. For example, what we dealt with during the pandemic, where small business was shut down. So now small business is middle class, but they're barely surviving. So they don't have enough to even hire. Another communist practice or socialist practice is something called minimum wage. And minimum wage makes it so that the middle class can't hire the lower class because they just can't afford to. But it's usually what I liked about Marx's assessment was the attitude of the middle class. And I see that from anecdotal evidence just within my own family, how they look at poor, how we look at the poor in our own family, how we have a hands-off approach and not a hands-on approach to dealing with the poverty in our own communities. Gentrification not only hurts black people, but also hurts white people. You have rich whites moving out poorer whites in places like Pennsylvania. Do people care about other people? And it seems like once people make it to that middle class, upper middle class, they put their chin up to the sky.
Okay,
and also,
so
Marx talks about
Marx
the bankers. What's that?
No, I finished that thought.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, okay, there's Marx in theory and Marx in philosophy, and then communism in practice. So my thought as I'm listening to you say that is that a fundamental, this is not an endorsement, it's a diagnosis, that a fundamental condition of humanity is that the merely poor want to be separated from the very poor, and the middle class want to be separated from the merely poor. And the above average income want to be separated from the middle class. And the merely rich want to be separated from the above average middle class. And the truly wealthy want to be separated from the merely rich. It truly is that is just sort of some fundamental condition of humanity. We can dive deeply into why that might be the case. But it really crosses race, it crosses culture, it spans the globe. Now, that's not an endorsement, again, that's a diagnosis. Now, Marx understanding that and seeing that is sort of like step one. Step two is whether or not there's any governmental mechanism that can correct that. And I think that after, a century of practice, we've seen that communism is a failed exercise in trying to alleviate that human condition. All it really is pointing out a division in society to place another group of elite at the top who is your savior, who is your statist, who can solve all of your problems. And that's just a failed experiment. And so the question is, well, if we want to try to address the lower class, and I agree with you, that's a problem we should. We want to try to help fellow man. The only real solution, or the best we've come to any real solution, is empathy. It is volunteerism. It's through human beings connecting as human beings and saying, through my charity or my time or through my heart, I volunteer to help you. Not because it's been commandeered by the government, not because there's some big program that's proven to be successful, but ultimately you have to impress upon the better angels of humans.
Yeah, I totally agree. Government's role, though, is about removing some of the regulations. You know, like I said, as long as minimum wage exists, it's only going to exasperate the problem. I mean, you go look at the story of Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell's another person, another soul, no pun intended, that started out as a socialist. And how does his story go? His story goes he joins the Department of Labor, Washington, D.C., right in the middle of the swamp. And he's like, I want to try and tackle this minimum wage thing. So he does a whole bunch of research. He comes back with the data and he finds a solution to the problem, or he's asking questions about the problem. And when he asked those questions, they didn't want to give him the data to those questions, because if they did, you'd find out what the true problem is. And he was like, that's when he realized he was following the wrong doctrine of socialism, and that government is not the answer to these things. So, you know, the more they raise minimum wage, the more they're going to alienate the middle class, and the greater the lower class is going to become. Communism in practice just does not work. It only works within your household or small communities.
Exactly. Within small communities or within your household. That's so wonderfully well put. So that brings me to this. I've seen some of what you guys have said. I think you put out a video like Hotepistan. And, you know, you talk a lot about, like, we got to build black businesses. We in the black community, we got to build black businesses. We got to build an internal community of support to build the foundations of wealth and success in society. And you can look at other communities, ethnic communities, racial communities, who have done that. I'm curious, like, are you a black separatist? I'm not suggesting that description of what you might idealize is black separatism, but I do think that someone that was listening who's like inclined to think that way would wonder, hey, are you talking about black separatism?
Okay, yeah. So let's deal with that. So in Hotep Nation, there are many white members. So we just did a show called The Grifties. This is our yearly award show. Our program director is white. Our video director is white. In fact, we did it because of our video director. We had Sam Tripoli on that stage.
So you have white friends?
Shane Cashman, Chrissy Mayer. I'm not a black separatist, right? Like, even Chrissy Mayer has gotten backlash to some of the things she said, right? I don't really care about race. What I'm saying is I'm dealing in reality, okay? And if we were to deal with this thing at a very simplistic level, you have Nation A, you have Nation B, right? Nation A has X amount of resources and Nation B has X amount of resources. There's going to be some exchange there. And if there's not a fair and even exchange, then something is going to go wrong, okay? So if this nation is dependent upon this nation for sustenance, let's say it's grain or whatever, and there's no two-way situation, well, what happens when you're the dependent in a situation? Look at a child and father relationship, child and parent relationship. If they're the dependent, then you have to follow the rules of the master, right? Look at the relationship between America and China. We can't really do too much with China because 90% of the goods in Walmart come from China. Our microchips and all this other stuff comes from, right? So when you're dealing in trying to create power, independence, freedom, you have to look at economics. So when I saw black people complaining, Black Lives Matter and all this other stuff, I'm like, well, the first thing we need to do is we need to check our GDP and our GNP of black people and then decide, what's the next move. For example, the other day I saw somebody complaining because they're dealing with hair care products in a beauty supply store, and they're saying that Chinese people won't sell to them, or they sell to them at higher prices, marginalizing them and basically, kicking them out of the industry. And this is why black hair beauty supply stores always go out of business, because they can't keep up with the Chinese, because the Chinese control manufacturing and distribution. So this is something I tell people, this is basic economics. Who manufactures the goods and who handles the distribution? The same thing in the music industry. You have people complaining about the music industry, but who handles the distribution? right? So if you're not looking at, from farm to table, so to speak, then you're not really understanding the situation. And you can see how black people have been behind the eight ball. And that's why integration has killed us, because we had our own banks, we had our own farms. And now today, it's just not that. So the core of human civilization is about economics. What are you producing? What are you exporting? What are you importing? This has nothing really to do with race, just has everything to do with just basic functions of humanity.
I keep thinking I want to transition to ask you about the conversation I led today with the Will Cain Show, Joe Biden, but I have to just keep following my own curiosity based upon what you say. So you tweeted this, which I found fascinating. You said, "There's no such thing as a black or a white people. These terms erase the memories of African or European lineage. Then the juxtaposition creates division, war. Know thyself." So, like, I mean, I think I totally get what you're saying there. Like this superficial manufactured coalition of people, right? Oh, you're black, I'm white, is both a false divider and a false unifier, right? At the same time. It's like, I don't know if that's what you're saying, but you also are talking about unifying black America in a self-sustaining way. I assume what you're talking about there is like, whatever your ethnic heritage, black is part of it. West African, North African, East African, whatever mine is, white is only a superficial descriptor of, Scotch, Irish, whatever it may be, tracing me back to my lineage. And now we've divided this society based on these things that are really cosmetic.
Yeah. So let's look at the nation where it is today, right? Absolute mess. Everybody's complaining, drag queen story hour, all this stuff, right? So what happens is we've lost our way. Now, when you go by the term white and I go by the term black, how far back can we retrace our steps? Because if you're trying to figure out where we went wrong, you have to retrace your steps. So if we're talking about black and white, that stops somewhere. But if you say, yo, I'm Irish and I'm Italian, well, we can trace those back really far all the way into Europe. And we can begin to study who we are and how we acted. With African people, we can trace that back. Oh, I'm from Africa. But, well, what were the customs and how did we deal with our problems? So it's about understanding tradition. And I think today where we are, it's time to go back. We've gone awry somewhere. It's time to go backwards. And when you're dealing with black and white, you erase memories. And that's really what this is designed to do. It's designed to erase the memories of African and European peoples. And it also, what it also does is it wants to create homogeneity of minds, right? Because then the communist system can insert their mind virus easier. Like we can just inject this thing into all white people. But if you said, yo, I'm Italian and I'm Irish and I'm French and I'm German, well, they have to take time to reconstruct the mind virus for all these different cultures, right? And then once you create that homogeneity of whiteness and that homogeneity of blackness, now you can put those two things at odds and create this divide and conquer type situation.
But at this point, I'm curious, at this point in America, what would you say to the idea that there is a distinct African-American culture now separated from whatever historical origins got us to this point? So, I was in sports for a long time, and this is not just in sports, but it's something you hear a lot in sports, for the culture, right? For the culture. And I've actually seen you say this as well, where you've talked about black conservatives, and you've kind of said, black conservatives are pretty far removed from black culture. So even though you're advocating for this deeper understanding of who we are as kind of as individuals, although also kind of understanding as individuals where we fit into these historical tribes, you are at the same time acknowledging a culture of African Americans, and I don't know what your response would be to that, because you've said that many black conservatives are too far removed from that culture. And you have others that say, constantly for the culture.
Yeah. So you can take the microscope and you can zoom in or zoom out however you want. I mean, if you were to take the microscope and zoom all the way in, we're talking about what is the culture of Hotep Jesus as a man born in New Jersey, right? Like New Jersey has its own culture. I'm from Central Jersey. Central Jersey has a different culture from South Jersey, right? So we can zoom in and zoom out as much as we want. But when we're dealing with blanket terms like black and white, that's zooming out, right? So it's like, okay, if you want to zoom out, let's zoom out. What is black and what is white? Really, what you're doing is you're replacing European with white and you're replacing African with black. And that's a very 1984 thing to do, right? Where they like to swap words out on, Orwellian, type situation happening here. And this is erasing memory. And that's what they're trying to erase your memory so you can't remember who you are. So, and then what happens is when you can't remember who you are, you don't have an identity. So now you're walking around without an identity, looking for one. And now you have so-called Europeans running around calling themselves so-called white people. And what is a white people? There is no such thing as a white people. So you're just the wandering lost. And that's why the country looks the way it does, because people don't know who they are. Black people, you say we have this thing for the culture because we are searching for an identity and we can't find our identity because our memory has been erased.
Oh, that's really, really fascinating. So I want to get your thoughts on this statement. It's not a statement. It's really kind of how I have viewed race relations, Hotep. I've always thought, okay, the idea of colorblindness is ridiculous. Nobody can be truly colorblind. So not only, to your point, do you acknowledge who you are, you acknowledge who other people are. And we don't pretend that there are no differences. We acknowledge each other's differences. Now, the goal should be, not in just the modern day DEI sense of celebrate our differences. But yeah, I mean, that was kind of the cool thing about the idea of America. Like, we were going to take the best from every culture and incorporate it into this melting pot. But we're also going to identify and reject the worst from these cultures. So that acknowledges a level of cultural color acknowledgement. And then on the individual ethnic level, we're just acknowledging reality that we all see each other's differences. But then once we do that, and maybe that ties into your idea of our memories, this is the part that I've always held in high esteem. What we try to do after that acknowledgement is not leave them behind, not forget, but move beyond into seeing each other as individuals. Because whatever those memories are or superficial differences, I don't know how much of the pie graph they make up of us, but I don't think it's the majority, because you're still a dude. I'm a guy. We are still going to have our commonalities. Maybe it's sports, maybe it's music, maybe it's our values, maybe it's the way we treat our families, and we're going to have our differences. And those are much a bigger part on an individual level of how we should go about, interacting with each other as Americans.
Yeah. So, I want to refine what you said. You said after we recognize our differences, we move forward, but there's an intermediate step there. The intermediate step is sharing the culture, right? When we look at the culture in the Black community of tap dancing, that has Irish origins. When we look at jump rope in the Black community, something called double Dutch, that actually comes from the Dutch. So there are European pieces of culture that has been shared with the African body, and at some point this is proof of cooperation. The other thing that is proof of cooperation is disintegration. What do they call it? Segregation. Segregation is proof of so-called black and white cooperation. Because if black and white people naturally separated, you wouldn't need to legislate segregation. They legislated segregation because we were cooperating, because I recognized your culture, you recognized mine, and I said, well, here's how we cook our pie. And you said, well, here's how we cook our pie. Here's how we dance. Here's how we dance. And then through these things, we create new cultures that is an amalgamation of both of our cultures, right? Which borns a new thing, right? And that's what America was supposed to be about. But instead, what we get is government hopping in and creating division.
All right, I led into this conversation with Joe Biden and the black vote as a pretext. We ended up saving it for the very end because, to be honest, everything was much more interesting to me. But does black America, in your estimation, want a mamala? Do they? That's on one level, and I have imagine how you're going to spike that volleyball. But is black America? I want to ask this on two levels. Is black America abandoning Joe Biden? But that would be something particular to Joe Biden. Do you think there's a movement of black America actually abandoning Democrats?
Oh, yes and no, right? Because, again, like, black America is not homogenous, right? What I like to do is I like to break it up into segments. So what you're talking about is the black voting bloc, right? And the black voting bloc skews older and female. Now, are segments of the black voter bloc leaving the Democratic Party? Yes. But black people in general have a huge distrust of government to where we don't participate in politics, right? Like, I don't vote because I don't want to participate in a garbage government, right? So I'm part of that demographic that's like, yo, Democrats, Republicans, they're pretty much the same to me. They're both communists at the end of the day, right? So we generally don't deal in politics. So I can't say the black community is walking away from the Democratic Party. What I can say, of those who are voting this year and have voted in the past, we are walking away from Joe Biden and voting Democrat. I think what it is we're held ransom. This is the biggest racial or racist, systemic racist problem in America is black people are held ransom, bro, by the Democratic Party. Like, some people say it's a Democratic plantation. No, it's a prison. We are locked in because if I don't agree with those politics, guess what? I can't take care of my family because I can't get a job. If I speak out against this, I lose my endorsements. Think about all of the entertainers, whether they're actors or musicians, that are silent because they are afraid to lose their livelihood. We are held ransom by the Democratic vote, and only those who have achieved ultimate wealth have the ability to have an independent voice. The other thing is, they have such a stronghold over black media now. Remember that black media takeover I was telling you about, that they'll have your own people looking at you like you're the enemy. Malcolm X talks about that, how the media make the hero look like the villain and the villain look like the hero. So not only would you be canceled by the corporations, you'll be canceled by your own people, because the perception is if you vote for Trump or you don't look at Democrats, then you're some sort of sellout. So currently, we're in like a psychological prison, a physical prison, a financial prison, and we're being held ransom. And I just want to know what the cost is so we can get out of it.
What a fascinating conversation, man. This is the first time we've got to speak. I've seen you a few times, both on various platforms and on Fox News, but I really appreciate this. I hope we can do it again. I've loved this conversation. Hotep Jesus.
Great questions. Some people ask me terrible questions. Those are great questions. Great conversation. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Hotep.